Hello, and welcome to another session of the Publish with Purpose Virtual Summit brought to you by Emerald Lake Books, where we're serious about your publishing success. I'm your host, Tara Alemany, and the founder of Emerald Lake Books. And today we're talking with Annalisa Summea about how to make your first 5 fiction pages sparkle. Annalisa, it's so good to have you here.
I'm so thrilled to be here and to be a part of this summit.
I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. So for those of you who don't know Annalisa, she helps writers to finish novels, published traditionally, and live the author lifestyle. She writes for many local, national, and international publications, has written and produced sketches for a Telly Award-winning CBS television show. She and her work have been featured on Huffington Post Live, PBS, the New York Times, and the Associated Press, as well as many podcasts, radio, and television programs. Her book, Storytelling for Pantsers, is a recipient of a CIPA EVVY Silver Award for Best Business Book and a finalist in the humor category. Her newest title is Stage Whispers, A Living History Retold. Annalisa has taught writing around the world, spoken at writing conferences in New York, London, Paris, Boston, and beyond. When she's not writing, you can find her walking her dog, who I met earlier, and camping with her Girl Scout troop, or volunteering with a Rotary Club. So that's quite the active life there, Annalisa.
Yes, well, I like to stay engaged.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing. We live until we die, right? So how did you get started with marketing books?
I mean, that's a good question. I guess I started way back as a writer. Like many writers, I've been writing since I could hold a crayon. Like many writers, I wrote those books for my family. I had a magazine called Family Fun that I wrote for my family. So it was always something that was on my heart and soul to be a storyteller, to be a writer. And I had my first publication at 9 years old. I won a poetry contest and I got to read my poem next to the governor at the State House. And so it's just something that's been on my soul. And then fast forwarding, getting my first real publications in my 20s. And eventually people say, well, how did you do that? How did you get published? Can you help me? And that really launched this amazing career that I have now, helping authors to get unstuck, to get into creative flow and finish their book. That's the first step. And then to traditionally publish that novel and live the author lifestyle, which looks different for every author, but almost every author wants to make a living off of their books in some way and live in a cabin or live in New York City or whatever their author dream is. But that's what we're putting together for them.
I love the fact that you started so young. My first published work was in 3rd grade in Cricket magazine. So I had that same, this is wonderful. Somebody else has printed and reading my book, reading my work and all of that. So it was wonderful.
Yes.
So what are we're going to be talking about how to make those first 5 pages of fiction sparkle. So let's talk first about why that's so crucial.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as many writers will know, if you're pitching to a literary agent, that literary agent will often ask for your beginning pages. They might also ask for a synopsis, a query letter, some of the standard submission materials. But if they're asking for a sample, it's going to be some of your first pages, 5 pages, 10 pages, 50 pages. And they're going to make a snap judgment, usually within 30 seconds. This is working, this isn't. And that upsets a whole lot of authors that I talk to, right? Because this is their work, this is their baby, they worked hard on this, right? And so some of them will even say, but wait, on page 20, it gets really good. Well, they're not going to wait until page 20. And so, just like if we're getting a job or we're going out on a first date, we have to make that first impression. We've only got a snap second to do it. And one of the reasons that I like to talk about this and why I'm so passionate about it, and you can hear it in my voice, is that a lot of times authors are getting rejected. They're not really sure why, what's not working. And so this helping people with their beginnings, their first 5 pages, is something that I have helped with at big conferences, at small conferences, because I'm really passionate about helping them to make a good first impression.
That's wonderful. So what techniques or storytelling elements can writers use to create an emotional connection between the reader and the story right from the beginning?
Yeah, I mean, there are a whole lot of techniques that are really important. And some of the mistakes that I see writers making in those beginnings are Yeah, well, let's talk about first impressions, right? So if I showed up today in like plaid, polyester, pantsuit with the bell bottoms, right? You might think that I was like really trendy and retro. That might be cool. But somebody else might think, gosh, you know, she's not really with it. It's not 1973 anymore. We're not doing that thing. That seems pretty obvious to most of us in terms of fashion, but a lot of writers are doing the same thing in terms of the way that they're showing up in their book. And so, you know, you asked about craft principles, like bell bottoms, like fashion. There are trends, things go in and out, and sometimes they're thematic, right? We went through a big vampire theme for a while there. Now we're over that. So different types of topics and themes will come up at different times in the publishing industry, but also techniques. So, what that looks like in terms of craft principles are things like prologues. So, there was a time when a prologue was a really popular thing. Now, unless you're writing epic fantasy, where it's really standard to have a prologue in your piece, for the most part, if I'm writing women's fiction or if I'm writing a crime mystery novel or a thriller, I'm not going to have a prologue in those genres. And so, really knowing, you know, what are the trends, what kinds of things are working. Another example, here's a little factoid for you. I'm all about the geeking out on literature, but A Tale of Two Cities, great book, but written in 1859. That first paragraph, that famous paragraph, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, is not only one paragraph, but it's one long sentence.
Yes.
Now, you can't get away with that anymore. We don't have that trend. We have shorter sentences now. And you can disagree with that and argue about people's attention spans and television and the internet ruining our brains. It doesn't matter what we believe about it or how we feel about it. It is a fact that it would be very difficult to publish a Dickensian type narrative in this day and age. So we just need to know what is that's working. And you know, when I say that to you, Tara, you're like, well, of course nobody's going to write Dickens, except that if we hop back into epic fantasy land, I hear a lot of people comparing themselves to the Tolkiens and the C.S. Lewis's, and they're geniuses and they're founding fathers and they're amazing and people still read them. But we can't write just like that anymore. We have to take it to a new level. And so it's really important to be up on your craft principles, to attend summits like this, to really know what it is that publishers, literary agents are looking for. And even if you're here and you're looking to self-publish, you still need to know what your reader wants and what's going to keep them engaged. Because ultimately, your literary agent is a reader, a professional reader, but a reader who needs to be engaged. And so it's just important across the board, whether you're self-publishing and you're talking to your reader, or you want to traditionally publish at the highest level and you're talking to, you know, Penguin or whoever it is that's going to publish your book.
Okay. So what are some common mistakes you see writers make in their opening pages then?
Oh, yes. So thinking about some of the common mistakes, too much backstory. And I totally understand this, guys. I really, really do. And you know, one of the things you mentioned, my book Storytelling for Pantsers, and one of the things that I talk about in that book at length is really this concept of the first time you tell the story, you tell yourself. And the second and the third and the 18th time, you have to tell your reader. And so the first time we tell the story, we're thinking about our character. Okay, here's Susie. She likes to swing on the swing and she wears a polka dotted dress, and her mom is a hairdresser and her dad is a barber, and they live in a small town, and like all these things that are about who Susie is. And you, the author, you're really excited about this. And oh, what if she goes over here? And what if she does this? And what if she has a pet dragon? And what if, right? That's really fun. That's our creativity. We love that. The reader's not going to follow us down our own creativity path. In order to make it a story, we have to translate that. And what that looks like in the opening pages is that it reads like a backstory. It's a little bit like in the Old Testament, right? Somebody begot somebody and somebody begot somebody raised. And we don't tell stories that way anymore. That was a method of telling a story for a really long time, to give somebody's backstory first. In this day and age, we want to get into, who is this person? What are they about? Or an action sequence. What are they doing? What are they facing right away? Versus giving us all of the, this is where they came from, this is who they are, this is their lineage, this is their hair color, even if it's not really relevant to what we need to know straight away in those opening 5 pages.
Do you think it works better than if the backstory is kind of woven throughout the first several chapters, or how do you recommend handling backstory then?
Well, that's a really good question. And some of that is going to be dictated by genre. There are some genres, let's go back to epic fantasy, where our readers are really looking for a lot of description. They want to know about the village and the way that they dress and the map, and all of those things are really important. So keeping your genre in mind is really, really important here, and what your readers are expecting. If I'm writing a thriller with these back-to-back action sequences, Jason Bourne type of a thriller, I'm not going to say, and he was born in a small town in Ohio and he went to this college, and I'm not going to stop him, running away from the robber or chasing the robber to give that information. And so I would say that the most important hint here in terms of backstory, don't think about yourself, no being selfish, not what's interesting to you, but really what's going to serve your plot, to translate that to the reader. And this is why we talk about killing your darlings, because you might be really fond of this backstory of, this is where he went to college and he met his girlfriend and whatever. But no, we got to cut that out because we need him to chase the robber down the street. And we don't care about Tammy, the ex-girlfriend from college at that moment. So really thinking about what is most relevant for me to include. How is this helping to move the plot forward? I don't know how many times a day I say that to my writers, and that's a really good challenge for yourself, is to think, is this a darling that I'm just attached to, or is this really serving a purpose on the page?
Okay. So what alternatives or strategies can writers employ to avoid these pitfalls?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean, I think in my mind, one of the most important tools that a writer has is getting quality feedback. And this is an area of frustration for so many writers. And I can't tell you, Tara, how many writers I talk to, and they're like, but I worked with an editor, I worked with a literary agent who went over this, I worked with somebody who is already published. And I want to put this out there as just a really good piece of advice. You need quality feedback. And beta readers are okay, but they can give you reader feedback. I like this, I don't like that, this works, it doesn't work. But unless they're experts on story, they can't come in and give you the kind of feedback that says, the structure is a little weak here, and so we really need to augment this area over here in order to foreshadow this to get to the climax, right? They're just gonna say, I don't get it, I don't know why he does that, I don't. And so it's helpful to a point, but let's not expect beta readers to be our coaches, to be our editors, because they can't. They can only do what beta readers can. And that might be slightly controversial. I know people love beta readers, but let's have them serve the purpose they serve. My toothbrush is good for cleaning my teeth, not so good if I want to style my hair. So let's use things for the purpose they're intended for. And then, beyond that, I think seeking out someone who understands how you want to publish. So if you're self-publishing, are you addressing the reader's needs? Are you doing what needs to happen? I mean, and Tara, I think that you're an amazing resource for people who are looking to go a more independent route for that. If you're looking to traditionally publish, then you need somebody to understand what the market is looking for. And I know writers, we're artists and we love our babies, but if we're going to be successful, we also need to recognize that this is a product. And, I don't follow Shark Tank, the TV program, avidly, but I've seen it, right? And so these people come and they're like, here's my product and I want you to back me and endorse this and help me to get it out into the marketplace. And sometimes they say yes, and sometimes they tear the people apart. And maybe that seems cruel, but a book is really no different, guys. It really isn't. And the publishing house probably loves art, and the people who work there love story, but they also want to sell books because it's a business and they need something that's going to be viable in the marketplace. And so if you've written the next Tolkien, maybe that's viable and maybe it isn't, but you need to know what the market viability of your piece is. And so I've had so many writers come to me and say, my editor loved it, and he really helped, and now it's great, and I've got a great story. Yes, you absolutely need a great, well-told story, and it needs to be viable in today's market.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that it is something where you can create the market for something if it's that good, or do you think that that's a myth?
I think it's a fact, but it's an anomaly, right? I mean, no, like how many times did Harry Potter get rejected? Nobody knew that that was going to be the next phenomenon, right? Everybody thought, nope, that's not viable. And sure enough, it happened. But there's one J.K. Rowling to tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who want to get published. And there are lots of stories like that, right? The Art of Motorcycle Maintenance was rejected 80 something times. He
Chicken
eventually
soup for
got
the soul.
published. What's that?
Chicken soup for the soul.
I mean, so many that got rejected and then ultimately became a phenomenon. But for every one of those, we don't know how many rejections were made for things that truly weren't viable, that weren't going to happen. And so I think we want inspiration. And so we look at the J.K. Rowlings of the world and we think, oh, it could be me. And sure, it could be. I'm not going to discourage anybody's dream, but let's not count on a dream without having a strategy and tactics based on data to get us there.
Yeah, I often share that you really need to know what the rules are and how to adhere to them before you can choose to selectively break them. Because if you don't know what the rules are, you don't know what the game is that you're playing.
100%. And I'm so glad you said that, Tara, because a lot of writers will come in and they say, well, I'm not really a reader, but I want to write this book. I'm sorry, but that's like saying, well, I don't really play basketball, but I want to be in the NBA. Like
Mhm.
it doesn't, I'm sorry, guys. Like with all of the love in my heart and care, like it just doesn't work that way. This is a profession. We're building professions, and I can't decide that I want to be a brain surgeon and show up at the hospital. I gotta train. I can't decide I want to be an NBA player and like dribble a ball a couple of times and show up to practice. It's just not how it works.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. So, how can writers introduce characters effectively in the first few pages without overwhelming the reader with too much information?
Oh, really good question. So I like to liken this to a play. So let's pretend that we're watching a play and we get character one. Bob comes on the stage and he has a little soliloquy and we're like, well, Bob's kind of a nice guy. I like him. And then Julie comes on and she and Bob interact and we're like, oh, I kind of like Julie. And then Sarah comes on and we're like, oh, I kind of like Sarah. And now we bring Frank on and now we bring Harry on. And okay, well, now we've got 6 people on stage and I'm like, I don't know who I need to care about, who I'm rooting for, which one's the main character. And so this again comes from that clarity that I was addressing at the beginning, where the first time you tell yourself the story and the second and third and 18th time you're telling your reader, it's the same issue with the backstory. If you've got too many characters on stage, I need to have 100% clarity on who my protagonist is, what they want, what's going to get in their way, and how they're ultimately going to get it or not get it, and what the result of that is. That story. That's it. Every single story is those 5 elements. And I am awed that thousands of years into storytelling, we still have new stories to tell. That's just an amazing miracle of the human experience.
Mm.
But to your point about knowing what works, about getting the training, it really has to follow that format. And so when we've got too many characters on stage, that's not going to work. Now, I'm kind of winding around like DNA, because this is also related to how things change. There was a time when people sat in front of the fire all winter and had time to languish over 2-inch thick books. I'm thinking of the great Russians, and all of the names in those books. And right, like it's just your Tolstoys of the world. And I love Anna Karenina, but my gosh, the number of characters in that book, right? And the same is true in British literature. I love Middlemarch, but my goodness, the number of characters in that book. We're not there anymore. People are reading on the subway, they're reading on their phones. We're not going to have that number of characters. So having 100% clarity on who your protagonist is, who or what your antagonist is, and how those two are going to play out to build this story is really, really, really important.
So the balance between showing and telling can often be a challenge for writers. How can authors strike the right balance, and how will they know they found it?
Ooh, that's a feedback thing. I mean, art is a craft. And way back when guilds began in medieval times. So I'm a medieval geek, so stay with me for a minute, right? But people learned a trade, so they were going to become barrel makers or candle makers or shoemakers, and they apprenticed for at least 7 years. And the purpose of that apprenticeship was to say, no, that's not how we put the heel on. That's not how we put the strap around a barrel. That's not even what a strap around a barrel is called, because Annalisa doesn't know. But just knowing what it is and getting that feedback. And we all did this when we were little, when we learned to walk, when we learned to ride a bike, when we learned penmanship, we got feedback. Nope, that's not quite right. Try it again. Nope, that's not quite right. Try it again. And because we've all been writing for a really long time, we went to school, we wrote stories, it was part of our upbringing. Many people think, oh, well, I did it before, so I can do it now. Well, probably. We've all probably got some stories to tell and some talent that can be drawn out. But that feedback is really what helps us to grow and learn so that we can start to see, oh, okay, that's really what it means to show and not tell. And here's an instance where it makes sense to tell in my genre based on the strengths that I bring to the table because of who I am as a writer, and building out the toolbox that I need in terms of, okay, here are some of my foibles. This is my Achilles heel. And when I'm trying to do this, oops, I always do that. So I'm going to build some new muscle for myself and learn how to do it in a new way. And the only thing that can give that to you is constant quality feedback.
That there's a challenge that we do every few months called the art of self-editing. And it is really interesting because as we teach the different methods of what we're looking at in the art of self-editing, we have writers keep a log of what are the common problems that they're finding in their own writing, so that when they're becoming more aware of that, now as they're sitting down to write their next piece, they're less inclined to make it because they've seen it frequently. One of our authors, we always have fun joking because in her young adult fantasy novel, her first one, every time there was a villain, he had broad shoulders. And so you knew who the villains were because of the broad shoulders, or maybe it was the good guys. I can't remember now. It's been so many years, but it was like that descriptor was only used for one set of characters and everybody else didn't get it. It was just like, so once it was pointed out, it was like every time we got together to edit and we'd come across another one, we'd burst out laughing because it was like, all right, we just, have to accept that this was the habit at the time. And she's now afraid to use the word.
That's really well. And I think, Terry, you bring up a really good point. And, what we say in my program is that I work with writers who take the writing craft seriously without taking themselves too seriously, right? Like we have to take our practice seriously, but we've got to have a sense of humor and just honesty. Like, here's the truth, Tara. I am good at some things. I'm not so good at some things that I'll probably never be good at. And there are a whole bunch of things that if I invest my time and my energy and my passion into, I could get pretty good at. And I'm just going to be really honest with myself about those things. And I think that I come into working with writers from that philosophy because we want to know, what are the things we do well? Let's celebrate that. That's great. Where are the areas where we're growing? Let's celebrate that growth. Where are the things that we're just not going to worry about that today? I'm not going to learn how to be a good basketball player. Look, guys, I'm 5 feet tall. Nobody's going to pick me on that team, right? So I'm not going to invest my energy there. I'm just going to be honest about who I am and be able to say to you, you know what, Tara, I'm really good at story structure. I understand story structure really, really well. I'm not a great basketball player. And there's no judgment there. All of that is okay and wonderful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting because as an editor, I find that one of the things that I tend to rely on others to pick up on is when the perspective shifts. And, it's like, I don't even notice it. I just go along because I'm so focused on the story. But as an editor, there are other things that will jump out at me on every single page, on every single line. It's like, so that's why it's always recommended to have more than one editor, because editors are humans and they're going to have the things that they key in on and the things they totally miss. So
100%.
So what tips can you share for crafting engaging dialogue within the first 5 pages of the story?
Well, dialogue can be tricky for some people. And I think it's because we want to make them sound a certain way, whatever that means. And people should sound like the way that people talk. So the way that I'm talking right now, hopefully I'm fairly articulate and eloquent, but I've paused. I've interrupted myself and taken a new direction. I've cut off sentences. These are the things that people do. And so if dialogue is a challenge, just in general, whether it's on your first 5 pages or at all, sit yourself down at a coffee shop and be nosy. Just start listening and writing down the way that people talk around you. Now, if you're not comfortable doing that, because it could be a little bit awkward depending on where you are, television's not perfect because of course it's scripted, but it's a good second, a TV or movie will really emulate the way that people talk. And getting that natural syncopation is at least 50% of the battle. And I would say the other tip that I have is about what we call in the television industry, the business. So the business is any action that is happening with the people and the props. And one of the traps that I see many debut authors falling into is thinking that they need to get all of the business, like they're the rolling camera of all of the action, right? So what this would look like is you've got your two characters sitting down to dinner at the restaurant, and they sit down and they take their napkins and they take their menu and then they get some water, and the waitress comes and the waitress comes again, and then they're like, oh, nice day today, chit chat, chit chat. Okay, that is the way that it happens in real life when we go to the restaurant. But what we really need to get to is that they're there to talk about whether or not they're going to get divorced or not. Well, that's the meat and potatoes. We don't care about the menus and the water and what they ordered unless it's serving the plot. Maybe the icy drink has to do with the icy tension between them. I don't know how you use your symbolism, but we want to make sure that it's relevant.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting because those action beats can be used to kind of set the pacing of the story. We have an author who wrote a collection of short stories, and one of them is really, really interesting because what it is a journalist has come to interview somebody about a historical event, but it's taking place in her kitchen while she is making a recipe. And so the action beats are kind of the next step in the recipe, but it slows down the dialogue so that you get the sense that they're spending time in thoughtful conversation. And because the thoughtful conversation is what you want to convey, you can't really do that if you're just he said, she said, he said, she said. So there's got to be something else that's the filler in there.
Right. Right. Enough action. Don't detract from the real theme.
Exactly. So why is the right feedback such a key piece of quality writing, and who should writers look to for that feedback?
Yeah, I mean, the feedback is so important. And one of the analogies that I use a whole lot to convey this, I like analogies, by the way.
I hadn't noticed.
Yeah. Call me a writer. I like to speak in prose here. So we all have teeth or have had teeth. And so just because I have teeth doesn't make me an expert on it. Just because my neighbor has teeth does not make him or her a dentist. It'd be really awkward if I knocked on my neighbor's door, like, hey, I've got a toothache. What do you think I should do? It seems pretty obvious in the dentist world, but writers do the equivalent of that when it comes to feedback. Like anybody could give me feedback. My neighbor could give me feedback. Or like at the next level, like my neighbor is an English teacher, or my neighbor wrote for a newspaper 10 years ago. So like there's some level of perceived expertise, but it isn't the expertise that you need, right? I mean, even if your neighbor were a dental hygienist, you might not want to say like, look, my tooth is rotten. What should I do? I mean, they might have some ideas, but that's not the expert that you're looking for. And so if you want the kind of feedback that's going to get you to the professional level, publishing time and time again, selling your books, then you need professional level feedback. And if you think that's not true, every baseball player, football player, basketball player, they have all got not only their official coaches, right, but they've got numerous coaches teaching them how to position their feet, how to position their hands, offense, defense, whatever it is, they have got additional coaches. These are professionals. They have worked their way all the way to the top of their field. But in order to stay at the top, they have got people giving them professional level feedback to stay at that level. Why do we think it would be different for writers? It really isn't. You really need that high level feedback across the board to keep you on your game.
Okay. So I'm going to segue into a different topic here because we're getting ready to wrap up this conversation. And that is that those who know me well know that I'm a big fan of technology. And so I'm taking the opportunity this year to ask our experts about one or two of their favorite tools for publishing or marketing or writing. So would you like to share one or two of your favorite tools?
Sure. I adore Google Docs. There's a little bit of a learning curve if you're coming from Word. The interface is similar but not identical. The reason that I love Google Docs is two reasons. One, there's only ever one version of the final copy. So that's great if you're sharing it with your editor or your coach. Oh, well, it wasn't that one, it was number two. You don't have to worry about any of that. It's all right there. It also has the ability to comment right there. You can chat in real time. It's really, really handy. The other thing that I love, because I love to write with a pen, and so I use their voice typing feature quite a bit. So I've got my written notes, and then I can just talk to my computer and it will type it. It also helps my editing brain to be like, that made sense when I wrote it, but I'm not liking it now. I'm going to rearrange that, or I'm going to change it up a little bit. So I love that as a tool. So I'm going to give that both of my votes because I think Google Docs is just a fabulous tool for writers.
That brings up an interesting point when you talked about being able to voice type it, because when we were talking about writing dialogue earlier, I was going to mention, and then I guess I forgot, was that when I'm working on writing dialogue, oftentimes I will dictate it because I know if I'm speaking it, it's going to sound more like speech than if I'm sitting down and trying to write it. And so that's kind of a tip or technique that I've used with that.
Yeah, good one. I like that one.
So as we've spoken, we've covered a lot of ground. Is there anything that you think we've missed that you'd like to share about really how to get those first 5 pages to sparkle?
Well, I think I'll just share, this trifecta that's really important. And I said this is the third time I said it, so make sure you write this one down. The first time you tell a story, you tell yourself, and then the second and third and 18th time you tell your reader. How you do that is to always have in mind the tone that you're using, your audience, and your purpose, and to not mix and match. You can't start out wanting to tell a story about basketball and ending with hockey, for example. So just stick with the trajectory that you're on and always have audience, tone, and purpose in mind.
Thank you very much for that. So I understand you have an offer for our viewers. It's a guide to agents. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I'm talking to all of these writers around the world, one of their frustrations is feeling like there's a real wall where agents, publishers are concerned. They're not getting answers, they're getting ghosted. Agents feel like they're not real people, but they really are. They're lovely people, they're great people. And so, what I put together is a guide to literary agents and publishers. This is going to give you firsthand information about some agents, some publishers, what they're looking for, straight from the horse's mouth, the way that they see the publishing industry and how it works, and some more tips on what kinds of things they're seeing in submissions that aren't working. So it's a really great guide to get to know some of these agents and publishers, and I hope it will help your participants to get to the next level.
Thank you so much for that. And for the attendees, just so you're aware, that redemption link will be in the virtual swag bag area. So look for it there. And Annalisa, if somebody wants to follow up with you after the summit, what's the best way to connect with you?
Absolutely. So the best way to find me, I've got a Facebook group of writers. It's called Write to Publish and Sell Your Novel. It's got my face at the top in an orange and red big blob at the top there. And I spend a lot of time in there giving writing tips and hanging out with writers and just talking about the publishing industry. So I'd love to see you over there.
Sounds wonderful. Thank you so much for participating in the summit this year. I know, as I said, our friend Carrie has recommended you a couple of times over the last few years, and I'm glad that we finally got the opportunity to connect and have you be part of our summit.
Well, thank you for reaching out. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I really hope that there's been a lot of value and this has been helpful for your participants.
I'm sure it has been. And for everybody else, we will see you in the next session. Bye.